Delighted to have as our executive in residence the perfect speaker to speak about One for All. Now, to give some context, the WTTC is a critical body in global travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation, representing over 200 companies. And now, ultimately, the council is looking at representing 2/3 of $1 trillion in turnover, equivalent to 30% of the entire sector. Julia has spent 14 years in aviation, she being on the board of British Airways and Iberia and the chief of staff of International Airlines Group. Love the fact that she's now at the helm of a travel and tourism entity, exactly the right person at the right time. Before joining BA, she was a senior advisor to the UK Prime Minister, and I suspect there might be some advice needed in that area as well, Julia, but we want to keep travel and tourism. She is ever on the go, so we find her now in an airport lounge. We are thrilled to have you with us, even though you are in transit. Thank you, Julia, for joining us on Rise.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. And to Anita, Rise, the professor, I'm hoping to be maybe not in the grumpy category today. I think I've got some good news, but I just think that the setup of Rise is incredible. The contributors have been so interesting, and it's a bit of light fun as well, which is super. I apologize for the music. I can't get Heathrow to turn it off.
That's okay. Julia, I guess I'm gonna ask you that then. Give us some good news. Give us some good news we haven't already heard elsewhere, if possible.
Well, you may or may not have seen it, but the WTTC, as you know, just as Anita said, World Travel and Tourism Council represent over 200 of the top industries. We did some research about 3 weeks ago with an organization called Forward Keys, and they're a collaborator of ours. And they were saying, first, one fact that we knew, which there is massive pent-up demand to travel. There's also people have the finances to travel. But secondly, this organization looks at booking data, and it was looking at booking data within Europe. And just for Easter, booking data was 230% above last year's figures. And for summer, and because these numbers are a bit old, they were 83%. So I do agree with what Anita says. Different bits of the world are recovering at different times, you know, from the New Zealand model right through to the UK, which is now adopting a very open economy. But I'm very, very optimistic that things will start moving quite soon. I think China's going to be critical to this question, and whether it takes place after the party elections in November. But I think once China opens up, that will, unless there's another variant, so I don't want to bet my money on it, but if there's not another variant, I think that will be the end of COVID for us. It will become an endemic and we will all go about our normal lives.
I hope that's true. I'm going to ask a quick follow-up if it's okay, Anita. I'm going to challenge you a little bit, Julia. So I'm a hotel, or I'm a travel company. I hear these numbers: 230% improvement over last year, 83% forward bookings for the summer. But I've seen positive numbers over the last 2 years, which, as Anita has pointed out, haven't necessarily materialized because of the new variant or new restrictions, etc. So how can we recommend to firms or industry sectors to make forward-looking strategic decisions based on data like this, when over the last 2 years, forward projections haven't really materialized in most cases?
Yeah, Professor, I think it's a really, really good question. I think the only thing that I'm heartened by is that the Omicron variant isn't resulting in massive deaths or hospitalization rates. That's the big difference with this variant. In the early days, they were saying that this variant is likely to also to give us some immunity against other variants. The big ticket answer, though, is getting the world vaccinated, triple vax or double vax, wherever you are. And we were certainly backing organizations like the UNWTO that were highlighting that we still had about 3 billion people globally who haven't been vaccinated. So, but I do feel that this feels like a less severe illness. Obviously, we're not medics, we're not scientists at the WTTC. We've been following, and I'm sure you do follow this, Professor, Massachusetts General, and obviously the scientists who were somewhat ahead of the curve out of South Africa. And really, that is what we're basing our assumptions on. We've also done assumptions with Oxford Economics that we're going to be publishing soon. They're the economic data that you mentioned. This was the economic data that says travel and tourism is worth 10% of global GDP, or $9.2 trillion in a normal year, whatever normal was, 2019. And that, as you say, has been really hit by 50%. So we're looking at Oxford Economic. We're about to publish some new data, which you and all your team there will be very welcome to see. And again, it is saying that we could, if there isn't a new variant, but we could be getting back up to 2022, nearly 2022 levels by the end of this, sorry, nearly 2019 levels by the end of 2022.
Brilliant. And sorry, did you want to finish this? I want to pick up something that you were saying, because I think one thing that's important, and I've always been arguing that the best metric to follow in terms of recovery is aviation. And so to your point, Forward Keys is such a valuable source. And we actually had on Rise to kick off 2022. A fan of yours, Willie Walsh, was our executive in residence. He was fabulous to have on. And I've always felt that it's that quantitative statistics tracking that's important. 2 years ago, when COVID started, have that, it was qualitative based. Now we're in a situation, we have 2 years of data that we can actually look back at and make informed decisions about. When people are looking at the travel and tourism, looking at hospitality, whatever it might be, what do you find are the metrics that people need to look at to make confident decision making and build up that confidence about how the industry is changing?
Yeah, I think obviously look at the scientific evidence of what's happening on COVID. Places like General Massachusetts are fantastic. You know, really make sure you understand the status of the underlying problem. But then I think booking data is really valuable because you can see where what customers, you know, what they want to do and where they want to go. And the other data I use is that whenever a country has opened up, I'll give you a small example. Right in the middle of it, about a year ago, the UK opened up to the Canary Islands. The bookings went, you know, completely mad. And then, of course, they closed it again and it closed. So it looks at when places open up, there is a lot of demand there. So those are the sort of things that, you know, we are looking at. But I do take the point that there will be some hotel casualties. That you're already seeing some of the casualties. And that's tragic. As you know, we've lost 62 million jobs. And as I say, you know, about $4.1 trillion in terms of value that's been wiped off our industry, our sector.
Thank you. Building on that, if I can just, Professor, very quickly, you took very recently a very strong stand about the CDC and, as was termed, the bullying of the cruise sector. For our audience to understand what the WTP presents and its role a little bit.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because obviously the CDC is doing an incredibly important role. And I've always said that when countries are faced by a pandemic, it's completely natural that they literally pull down the shutters or pull up the drawbridges or what, you know, whatever the terminology you want to use, and they look to save their own citizens. We completely understand that. I think the issue has been some of the measures to deal with Omicron. It's been the kind of the measures from a previous variant, so they're applying the incorrect measures. Now, the CDC, who we have a lot of respect for, it's unique actually in the travel sector. They control, if you like, some of the travel normatives around prisons, around elderly people's homes, social care, and also around cruise liners. And I think one thing we've been arguing is those things shouldn't really sit together because cruises, as you know, have got a long history of having to face actually illnesses and problems, you know, 60 years ago. They've now got operating theatres on board, they've got HEPA filters, all the crew are double vaccinated, they're tested daily, all the customers are double, triple vaccinated, they're tested regularly. So you're talking about a very, very controlled environment. And I think there was a concern by CDC that maybe a big ship might pitch up at a port and overwhelm the local hospital services, but that has actually never happened. And the truth is the positivity rates on board are is lower if you look at the United States than is happening in the general population. So we felt at WTTC that the cruise industry was unfairly, we understand it came from a good place, but that they were being unfairly impacted. And they also did it's a technical point, but they did a very sort of strange thing. They had them in kind of special measures, then they took special measures off and just said, do what you want, it's voluntary. And while to many people they thought, well, that's good, you know, what rules do we follow now? But in fact, it's left the sector a little bit unsure. And consequently, some of the big companies have not cancelled any of their cruising, but some of them have had to cancel some of their cruising. So that's what we tend to do. If we feel that an industry is being treated differently, then we will step in and speak up on their behalf.
Which is
I'm
great.
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to get a Christmas card from the CDC, but apart from that.
Lovely, because you're commercially agnostic. So that allows you to be in that position of support, rather than it seeming as if it's commercially motivated from one of the companies.
Exactly.
I'm going to change focus a little bit. Let's go back to this. You made a comment before about the jobs issue, and I want to go back to good news. You know, I think two good things that have come out of this horrible crisis for our industry. One was I can now reschedule an airline trip without a huge penalty. It's easy. The airlines have understood they have to be more flexible. They want our business, and they have to demonstrate this. And the second is, and this is a double-edged sword, is some people who are working in the industry had a chance to sit back and say, you know what, I don't actually want a career in this industry, or I want to be treated better. And I'm wondering if you think hotels and restaurants and airlines, et cetera, are recognizing both things. One is we need to be more flexible, and we need to treat our customers with a little bit more, flexibility, let's say, respect, flexibility. Is that going to stay long term? And on the jobs front, which is clearly the big challenge for a lot of the industries, especially, I study the hotel industry, for hotels, do you think there's going to be long-term positive implications for this in terms of the employer-employee relation, or do the economics of hospitality businesses not really allow for better benefits, better treatment for employees?
Yeah, actually, Professor, it's a great question, because as you know, we are suffering quite a lot of labour shortages now in what I would term the developed world. Of course, Europe and America, they're finding it very, very hard to recruit. And we know the reasons for that. During the pandemic, people have been working from home. They felt very insecure about their roles. Some of them have been furloughed. And they thought, well, listen, there are other sectors and other industries that are doing so well. Why don't I use my skills over there? So we kind of understand that there is a deep problem that we're going to need to look to. Sorry, the main point you were making, though, was that Anita was making. Just remind me again. It was the sorry, I went down a rabbit hole on the.
That's okay. I'm curious on the two fronts. Businesses continue to be flexible and recognizing
exactly.
that.
Yes, sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, so there are some great examples of that. There's a hotel chain called Sandals that operates out of the Caribbean, headed up by a fantastic guy called Adam Stewart. And he quickly realized that, just as Anita said, customers were worried, not just about coming and getting COVID, but if they got COVID, they could then be stuck there. And he's made this, but he's done it really smartly. He's looked at the kind of commercial aspects of this. But if you go and stay at a Sandals, this isn't an advert for Sandals Hotel, this is just an example of what he's done. But although it's a great product. But if you go and stay at Sandals Hotel, if you or any of your family members contract COVID, they will look after you. Any addition to your stay, they will pay for. They will then pay for any difference in your air flight home, although, as you said, the airlines have become much more flexible anyway, and I've seen some great practice there. And also, they will offer you a free holiday. So that's really interesting. But if you look at in the commercials, I imagine they've done their sums and realized that isn't going to happen too often. So it's a great offer to make. They genuinely deliver it. It makes people more assured, but then they have a great kind of testing regime when you go to their properties. So they're almost kind of protecting themselves against the eventuality that will actually happen. So I think we are seeing some differences. I also think, though, it's what you were saying, you kind of quite like working at home and other people people saying they like, really want to get back into the office and they want to get out. I think people, and the revenge tourism, I think people are desperate to get out. I was at the trade fair in Madrid, the travel and tourism trade fair called Fitur. Honestly, it was like, we could have a phrase in English about, you know, springing for joy like pit ponies. These were the ponies that used to be kept decked in the mines, and then they'd be brought up for spring, and they'd just spring around. There was a real atmosphere of optimism, and the fact that we really do need these trade fairs. We really do need to be able to talk to each other and do deals. And there were a lot of deals that happened at that trade fair. So I think I'm very optimistic. I think people will want to return to work. And I think consumers, you know, the research we've done says that people want to get to the great outdoors. You know, they want to do more leisure, as you were saying, but they've been cooped up and they just want to spread their wings. So I am feeling very positive about the industry, I have to say.
I guess my concern, sorry, Anita, I guess my concern is, let's assume that there is a post-pandemic world. Will we return to the way things were before, becoming very tough on customers, becoming very tough on employees, et cetera? Or will there be long-term benefits? Or, you know, because memories are short. And my concern is, you know, let's just pretend a year from now we're, you know, post-pandemic. Is everything, are airlines and hotels that are going to forget the, let's say, progress they've made in terms of the employee and customer relationship? And that's my concern, is that period.
Yeah, I think you're right, Professor. I think that there will be sort of brought into the system more flexibility. But what you have to remember with airlines, and I worked in the sector for a long time, is the margins are wafer thin. Sure. You know, this is a sector that's massively capital asset dependent. You know, the planes cost a lot of money, the fuel costs a lot of money, the airport charges cost a lot of money, your crew, your staff cost a lot of money. So it's and the competition is so fierce. You know, it's interesting when airlines deal with other organizations like aircraft manufacturers, they're dealing with duopolies really. Or if they deal with if they deal with an airport, if they want to fly to London, you can say there's choice, but there isn't really. If you want to come to Heathrow, you have to come to Heathrow. So they're dealing engine manufacturers, you know, GE, Rolls-Royce, great, but these are duopolies. Meanwhile, there are many, the world is saturated with airlines. So the margins are very, very thin. So at the end of the day, something will have to give. And I think the way you were sort of presenting is maybe the airlines in the past have been quite tough on customers, is I don't think they could afford to be anything other. So there might have to be some kind of business shift in the whole model. But either people, if you want complete and absolute flexibility, you're going to have to pay for it. That is my view.
Indeed. It's interesting the way you're speaking, Julia, because I'm a big believer that there's no back to normal, because there's no back and there's no normal. We've all changed. And as much as, especially being an invisible crisis, we are the travelers. We're not just the practitioners. And that's where I think what you were saying is so important about whether it's the forward key stats or the hotels. People are looking for those signs of confidence. We felt it at the ATM that there was this, you could see destinations were looking at each other and looking to, I mean, Ireland and Saudi Arabia stood out as two of the boldest destinations saying, we want people to travel back. And that confidence is almost a fuel that people need to keep passing on. To that point, I'm a firm believer that Mother Nature is a tourism practitioner in disguise. And we've always talked about the industry needing to talk with one voice. We've always talked about the fact that we're interconnected. We're actually interdependent. That's been one of the silver linings of this crisis, shall I say. The WTTC, UNWTO, IATA, WHO, CLIA, you've genuinely come together through this crisis. How are we a stronger industry because of this crisis? So whatever happens with the customer relationships, which I believe will shift, because again, everyone has felt it. Where do you believe this to be a covert blessing for our industry to finally re-engineer in a way that serves the industry of the future?
Yeah, it's a great question, Anita. And I think one of the things that have beset or bedeviled our industry or our sector is that the industries don't hang together, they don't stick together. And education is very, aviation is very much in its world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as you say, the golden lining indeed has been that we've been able to come together and we really work together. We formed such incredible relationships during this. I mean, you know, myself with you, yourself, UN, WTO, WTTC, we've come together. And I think the other silver lining is that governments that were very, very dependent on travel and tourism have seen their economies destroyed, and they've realized that they cannot go on like this. So we know we've got the attention of the trouble with our industries. We tend to talk in a bubble and we talk to ourselves. So I've been saying I love to meet the travel and tourism ministers, but the people we really need to be talking to are the presidents and the prime ministers. Those are the people we really need to be engaging with as an industry. And I think we've now got that seat at the table, even though it's been because of a pandemic. We are now being more listened to.
Absolutely. And I think to your point as well, we are talking about the industry now in language that matters to them, to job creation, the investment, the votes, quite truly. So I think all of us are now around the same narrative, which is going to help. So shall we share, Julia, with our audience and ask if any?
Grace, any questions?
Yes, we have had a couple of questions in, and the first one is, why did you leave aviation to go into travel and tourism?
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that question. I think the thing is, if you look at someone's career, I had probably spent 10 to 12 years in the aviation sector. And I think I'm just a believer that I think it's good to move and do different things and see different perspectives. And I heard about this role. I think the WTTC has done amazing things. And that was the long and the short of it, really. You know, I moved from central government to the private sector again for the same reasons. I know some people spend their careers all in one industry, and certainly for travel and tourism it can be so varied and offer so many opportunities. But I just think the way I've always viewed my career is, you know, I spend a good time and dedication and commitment in one area, but if something else at the end of the day catches my, and of course there's the complete logic. I think I noticed that aviation was quite separate as well from travel and tourism, and I felt there's a need for a role to join up, as we were saying before. But thank you for the question.
But it's funny, if I can just add on that, because sorry, I mean, you know, I'm one of your big cheerleaders. I was thrilled when you came on board, because aviation is the primary artery of our industry. And cruise industry will say, but we can't get our passengers to the ports without the aviation. So you being there, that is such a fundamental part of the engineering of the entire ecosystem. So it's spectacular that you're with us, and it's a huge asset.
Thank you. And I also think around sustainability, you know, often hotels or other parts of the value chain in travel and tourism think, oh, you know, it's the planes that cause all the problems in terms of carbon. And actually what was interesting, since the 1970s, I mean, I wasn't there in the 1970s, but VA has been publishing environmental impact reports. This is an industry that takes it very, very seriously, its commitment to sustainability. It is investing vast amounts of money in sustainable aviation fuel, in buying cleaner aircraft. This is money that belongs to their shareholders. You know, they're literally investing hundreds of billions of dollars into this arena. And it is true, there is not immediately an alternative to jet fuel, but you know, boy, are they trying hard. And I felt it was almost like other bits of the sector didn't really want to include aviation because they were seen as the big bad boys. But we've got to get over that. As you say, it is the artery of our sector.
Indeed.
Okay. Grace, another question?
Yes. The next question is, what has been the most challenging part of managing so many different parts of the industry at once, and how do you choose which one to prioritise?
No, it's a very good question. Well, obviously we have members that come from the hotel area, as you were saying, from tour operators, and what we do is we have a OPCO, so we have a senior management board that will have the head of the Hilton group and various people, and we get together, we look at the research that's around, and then we set our direction. But I think everybody has felt let's see how we can get travel and tourism moving again. What can we do? So in a strange way, this, as Anita was saying, the pandemic has united us around a single theme. And one of the other themes is, as I said, I understood why nation states turned inwards, but they've all come up with different rules. You know, I always give the example that at the same time, the UK banned travel to Mexico and US stayed open to Mexico. Now, we may understand there are political reasons for that, but if you say that more or less they have similar scientists looking at similar data, you know, why would they do that? So we have been calling on governments to try and behave more rationally. And it's hard because it's a very emotional subject, but that's certainly been, and it's united all of us across the whole sector.
Grace, I think we have time for another question.
Yes, of course. As you'll have seen recently in the news, there's the new variant, the BA2, and do you think this mutation will have an impact on travel?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's something that we are monitoring now. I won't claim to be an expert on it, and I was very interested to see the data earlier. I mean, it really all depends. If it starts causing hospitalizations and increases death rates, and, you know, we could be back to where we were. But at the moment, what you've got to remember is there will be new variants discovered all the time. So there's a degree of how much the media pick this up. But I kind of get the feeling that a lot of people want this over with now. I know that's a strange thing to say, but I think unless it proves to be really harmful, I don't think it will stop the opening up that we're beginning to see around the world.
Julie, I have a question on that, to your point about opening up. In the issue of focus, I've always credited Willie Walsh because he's been always so good on forcing people to focus on, you need to deal with this, you need to deal with this, even in the traveler experience side rather than on the pure aviation side. If we look at making sure that we do indeed get that lift at the end of 2022, what do you believe is a deal breaker that we as an industry need to get right and fix to be able to get travel and tourism moving again? What should our priority be?
I think one of the priorities is trying to digitalize just about the whole traveller journey. As I've always said, if I get on the tube, the trains here, buses in the UK, I just show my phone. And we need to get to that point, because then all the information, whether it's security information, visa information, health information, can sit behind that. And I know there are a lot of concerns about people's personal details, but, you know, we're giving a lot of our personal details to a lot of people every day. So it's a matter of making sure that there are proper safeguards. But I think that would get everything moving much faster, because if travel comes back with the kind of queues we're seeing at the moment, when I get out my little bit of paper, that's not going to be good. So yeah, let's hope that we can move to a more digital solution for travel.
It's to your point as well, because the stacks of paper now that are needed, showing your passport is almost secondary compared to everything else, and the delays it's causing. When I was heading to Cambodia, we left 20 minutes late from Zurich to Bangkok just because of paperwork checks.
Yeah,
it must be a nightmare through the entire team then as a result.
Yeah, and of course, the reason that is happening is because governments are putting the onus and the risk on the carriers. So the carriers are not going to let you get on, because if you get off and you haven't got a bit of paper, they've got to pay the cost of that. So, but let's see if we can digitalize it, make it smoother. I have to say, when I went to Madrid, it was very simple. So some countries are getting it now, definitely.
Brilliant. Can I sneak in another question, please, Professor?
Yes.
Excellent. Julia, my favorite question to ask leaders. Why are you a better leader because of COVID?
Well, I have to say, I think they've done a study on the type of brains that leaders have, and they have a touch of ADHD, and ADHD brains tend to like to solve a lot of problems very, very quickly and come up with solutions. So oddly enough, leaders generally are very good in crises. You know, they kind of thrive of it. If anything, leaders can sometimes get a bit bored when things are going normally. But I think, you know, what it's taught us, I like something you said earlier about being compassionate and being humanity, because people have had very, very different experiences, and the experience they've had have impacted on people differently as well. We've all got some friends who don't even like to leave their house, and others that are, you know, just want to get out there and start hugging and kissing everybody. But I think really being respectful of people's mental health and respectful of different customer types, I think it will make a better sector, a better industry all round.
This is the first time normally a crisis is there's an explosion and then there's a crisis.
Yeah.
We've had a sustained crisis for 2 years.
Yeah.
I think that's where it's forced people to think of the bigger context, and that's not a bad thing.
I've got to ask, if I can follow up, I have actually, you're saying it's been 2 years. My last question, it can be a short answer, is have you talked about anything other than COVID at the WTTC or in your other roles in the last 2 years? I mean, we've got Brexit, we've got Russia, Ukraine frontier under discussion. We've had the elections in America, riots at the Capitol. Any of that making, the discussions other than at the water cooler, or is it just COVID?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And if I was to be completely honest, probably 70% of the conversations are around that. But, a large percent of the conversations is talking about making connections and getting people learning from each other. We've done so much reaching out and learning from each other around COVID, I have to say. But we've been talking a lot around sustainability last year. We went to COP26. We presented for the first time ever sustainability, carbon footprint, roadmap to net zero by 2050. It's the first time we've ever done that for a sector, because as I said, we tended to go off in our different ways. So we've been doing quite a lot around sustainability. We've also been doing a lot around how is a traveller thinking? How does a traveller feel? Who are the people that want to start travelling first? So yes, but I'll be honest with you, COVID has been pretty dominating.
I think you, that other 30%, you've worked on diversity, you've worked on women, you've worked on child trafficking, you've worked on life trafficking, and so there has been, the WTTC has been invaluable as an intelligence machine for the last 2 years on issues that COVID has put the spotlight on in a way. So I think that's where, as a primary resource, WTTC.org is absolutely invaluable. There's no question. Stunning.
Julia, I'm gonna let you get on with your day, board your flight. I'm sure that's anytime soon. I mentioned this a couple of times in the last 2 years. I would love to get you down to Lausanne to speak to the students and to the faculty and have a conversation. So I'll be reaching out to you for that. Thanks, Anita, for the introduction. Have a great day. I really appreciate you sharing all this with our audience. I think it's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julia, from my side, huge loving thanks. I continue to be a fan, even more so, but travel very safely, and thank you for being with us on Rise.
Thank you very much, Anita. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.